Have you ever wondered how long you could survive without spending any money at all? Not saving money, not spending less, but spending absolutely nothing. No coffee, no food delivery, no quick purchases when you feel tired or bored. Just you and whatever you already have. I didn't think much about this question before. Like most people, I spent money every single day without even noticing. A small drink here, a snack there, a quick online order late at night. Nothing felt expensive in the moment, but somehow, at the end of each month, my money was always gone faster than I expected. And one day, that feeling started to bother me more than usual. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't actually know how much of my life depended on spending. Not the big things, but the small habits, the invisible ones, the things I did automatically without thinking. So I made a decision that felt simple, but also a little extreme. For 7 days, I would not spend a single dollar. No exceptions. At first, it sounded easy. I already had food at home. I had internet, electricity, everything I needed to survive. 7 days didn't seem that long. I told myself this would just be a small challenge, maybe even a fun one. But I didn't realize how quickly reality would change that idea. The first morning, everything felt normal. I woke up, made breakfast from what I already had, and sat down to start my day. There was a quiet sense of confidence, like I was finally in control of something that used to control me. But then, around midday, something small happened. I felt tired. Normally, I would just go out and buy a coffee without thinking. It wasn't about the coffee itself, it was the habit, the routine, the quick solution to a simple feeling. This time, I stopped. I stood there for a moment, thinking about it, and realized something strange. It wasn't that I needed the coffee. It was that I was used to solving discomfort by spending money. So I didn't buy it. I went back home, drank water, and tried to ignore the feeling. It worked, but only a little. Later that evening, another moment appeared. I felt bored. Not deeply bored, just that quiet kind of boredom that makes you reach for your phone. I opened an app, scrolled for a few minutes, and suddenly I saw something I wanted. It wasn't expensive, just a small item. Something I probably didn't need, but it looked useful enough to justify it. My finger paused above the screen. This was the kind of moment I never noticed before, the kind that felt harmless. But now, with this one simple rule, it became impossible to ignore. I closed the app. And for the first time that day, I felt something unexpected. Not frustration, but awareness. It was like I could suddenly see how many times I almost spent money without realizing it. How often I use spending as a quick answer to boredom, tiredness, or even just habit. By the end of the first day, I hadn't spent anything. Technically, I had succeeded, but mentally, something had already changed because it wasn't as easy as I thought, not even close. And as I went to bed that night, one thought stayed in my mind longer than anything else. If just one day felt like this, what would 7 days really do to me? The second day started with this strange mix of confidence and quiet tension. I had already completed one full day without spending anything, and part of me felt proud, like I had proven something to myself. But another part of me was more careful now, because I had already seen how often the urge to spend could appear without warning. That morning felt slower than usual, not physically slower, but mentally. I noticed everything more clearly: the food I ate, the time I spent, even the small decisions I made throughout the day. Without the option to quickly solve problems by spending money, I had to think a little longer about everything. And that's when the first real challenge appeared. I opened my fridge and realized something simple but uncomfortable. The food I had was enough. but not very exciting. Normally, and this would be the moment I would order something online or go out to eat. It wasn't about hunger, it was about preference. I wanted something better, something more satisfying. But that option didn't exist anymore. So I stood there for a moment, looking at what I had, and I felt a small wave of resistance. Not strong, not dramatic, just enough to make me hesitate. It made me realize how often I used money to avoid that exact feeling. In the end, I cooked a simple meal. Nothing special, but something interesting happened while I was eating. I paid more attention. The taste, the texture, even the act of sitting down and finishing a full meal without distraction felt different. It wasn't better in a dramatic way, but it felt more real, like I was actually present instead of rushing through it. Later that afternoon, another challenge came, and this one was harder. A friend texted me and asked if I wanted to go out. It was a normal invitation, nothing unusual, but I immediately knew the problem. Going out meant spending money. Even if I tried to avoid it, there would always be something, a drink, a snack, something small that would break the rule. For a few minutes, I didn't reply. I didn't expect this part to be difficult. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about connection, about not missing out, about not feeling different from everyone else. I almost said yes. I almost told myself that one small exception wouldn't matter. But I had made a clear rule: no exceptions. So I replied honestly. I said I couldn't go out this time because I was doing a personal challenge. The answer came back quickly. Just one drink won't hurt. That sentence stayed in my mind longer than I expected. Because it was true, in a way, one drink wouldn't change my life. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was whether I could stay consistent with something I decided to do. So I said no again. And after that, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling bad, I felt a quiet sense of control. Not excitement, not happiness, just a calm awareness that I had made a decision and followed it, even when it was uncomfortable. That feeling stayed with me for the rest of the day, but the day wasn't over yet. That evening, the boredom came back, stronger than before. Without spending, without going out, without the usual distractions, I had more empty time than I was used to. At first, it felt uncomfortable, like something was missing. So I did something simple. I went for a walk, no destination, no plan. And during that walk, I started to notice things I usually ignored. The sounds around me, the people passing by, even my own thoughts felt clearer somehow. It wasn't a magical moment, but it was different enough to feel meaningful. By the time I got home, the boredom had faded. Not because I replaced it with something exciting, but because I didn't run away from it. At the end of the second day, I realized something important. This challenge wasn't really about money anymore. It was about habits, about how quickly I tried to fix every small discomfort, and what might happen if I simply didn't. 2 days in, I was still going, but it was already changing me more than I expected. By the third day, something inside me had quietly shifted. The first 2 days were about noticing habits and resisting them. It felt like I was constantly catching myself before making small, automatic decisions. But now on the third day, those moments didn't feel as surprising anymore. They were still there, but I could see them coming earlier, almost like my mind was learning to slow down on its own. That morning, I didn't immediately think about what I couldn't do. Instead, I started thinking about what I already had. It was a subtle change, but it affected everything. I made breakfast again, simple as before, but this time I didn't compare it to anything else. I didn't think about what I was missing. I just focused on what was in front of me. And strangely, it felt enough. But the real challenge of the day didn't come from food or routine. It came from something deeper: motivation. Without spending money, without going out, Without the usual small rewards, the day started to feel a little flat. There was nothing to look forward to in the usual way. No quick excitement, no easy escape. And that's when I noticed something uncomfortable. A lot of my motivation came from those small rewards. Finish work, buy something, feel tired, get a treat, feel bored, scroll, and maybe purchase something small. Without those patterns, I felt a quiet emptiness in the middle of the day. Not sadness, not stress, just a lack of energy that I didn't fully understand. For a moment, I thought about breaking the rule, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted that feeling back, that small sense of reward, that quick change in mood. But instead of acting on it, I stopped and asked myself a simple question. What if I didn't need a reward right now? That question stayed with me longer than I expected. So instead of trying to fix the feeling, I continued with my day, slowly, without forcing anything. And something interesting started to happen. My focus improved. Without constant interruptions, without the habit of checking things or thinking about what to buy next, I stayed with one task longer than usual. It wasn't perfect, and my mind still wandered sometimes, but overall, I felt more present. It wasn't exciting, but it was steady. Later that afternoon, I faced another small but meaningful moment. I needed something. Not something urgent, but something useful. Normally, I would just buy it immediately without thinking twice. This time, I couldn't. So I looked around my space, trying to find an alternative. And it took more effort than I expected. At first, it felt inconvenient, even slightly frustrating. But after a few minutes, I found a simple solution using something I already had. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And that moment stayed in my mind because it made me realize how quickly I usually chose convenience over creativity, how often I replaced thinking with spending. That evening, I didn't feel the same strong boredom as the day before. It was still there, but softer. I didn't feel the need to escape it immediately. I sat with it for a while, and instead of reaching for something external, I just let the time pass naturally. I read a little, I thought about the past few days, and I noticed something I didn't expect to feel this early. Clarity. Not a big realization, not a dramatic change, just a quiet understanding that my daily life was full of patterns I had never questioned before. By the end of the third day, the challenge no longer felt like a restriction. It started to feel like a mirror, a way to see myself more clearly without distractions. 3 days in, I still hadn't spent anything, but more importantly, I was beginning to understand why that mattered. And somewhere in that quiet realization, I started to wonder, what else had I been doing automatically without ever noticing? By the fourth day, the challenge stopped feeling new. There was no excitement left in the idea of not spending money. It had become something quieter, more normal, almost like a background rule that followed me through the day without needing constant attention. And that was exactly when a different kind of difficulty began to appear. Not strong, not obvious, but persistent. That morning, I woke up without the same sense of purpose I had in the first few days. There was no curiosity driving me forward, no strong motivation to see what happens next. Instead, everything felt a little repetitive. The same food, the same routine, the same limitations. And for the first time, I felt something close to frustration. Not because I needed to spend money, but because I started to miss the variety that spending allowed me to have. The small changes, the little upgrades, the feeling that I could improve my day instantly if I wanted to. Now I couldn't. And that made the day feel longer than usual. Around midday, that feeling became stronger. I found myself opening apps again, not even to buy something, but just to look, to scroll, to imagine, to feel connected to that familiar world where everything is always available. It was almost automatic. And that's when I caught myself. I wasn't trying to buy anything. I was trying to feel something. That realization stayed with me because it showed me that spending money was never just about the item itself. It was about emotion, about changing how I felt in that moment quickly and easily. So I closed the apps again. But this time, it didn't feel like control. It felt like effort. The difference was small but important. Later that afternoon, I tried to do something productive, but my focus wasn't as strong as the day before. My mind kept drifting, not toward anything specific, just away from what I was doing. It was like my brain was looking for stimulation, for something new, something different, and without spending, those options were limited. For a while, I resisted the feeling. I tried to push through it, to stay disciplined, to continue the challenge exactly as I planned. But after some time, I realized that forcing myself wasn't working. So I changed my approach. Instead of fighting the feeling, I accepted it. I allowed the day to be a little slower, a little less productive. I stopped trying to make it perfect and just focused on moving through it naturally. And surprisingly, that helped. Not immediately, but gradually. The pressure disappeared, and with it, the frustration became softer, easier to manage. That evening, I went outside again, just like I did on the second day. But this time, the experience felt different. It wasn't about escaping boredom anymore. It was about creating a small change without needing money. The air felt cooler. The streets looked familiar, but somehow calmer. I walked without thinking too much, without trying to analyze everything. And for a while, my mind felt quiet again. Not empty, just settled. By the time I returned home, I realized something that I hadn't noticed before. Spending money used to be my fastest way to change how I felt, but it wasn't the only way. It was just the easiest, and maybe that was the real challenge, not avoiding spending, but learning other ways to deal with the same emotions. By the end of the fourth day, I was still following the rule: no money spent. But the experience was no longer about proving anything. It had become something deeper, something slower, and something that didn't give quick results. And as I sat there that night, one quiet thought came to me, almost without effort. If I could get through a day like this, then maybe I didn't need as much as I thought I did. By the fifth day, something surprising happened. The urge to spend didn't disappear completely, but it became quieter, less urgent, almost like background noise that I no longer needed to react to. It was still there, but it didn't control me in the same way anymore. That morning felt different from the others, not because anything had changed outside, but because something had changed inside. I didn't wake up thinking about the challenge. I didn't think about what I couldn't do. I simply started my day using what I had, moving through familiar routines without resistance. And for the first time, it felt normal. But what surprised me the most wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the presence of space. Without constant spending, without the habit of looking for something new to buy or consume, my mind felt less crowded. There were fewer decisions, fewer distractions, fewer moments of unnecessary thinking. Everything felt simpler. Later that day, I noticed how much time I actually had. Small moments that I used to fill with quick purchases or endless scrolling were now open. At first, that kind of space used to feel uncomfortable, even empty. But now it felt like something I could actually use. So I started paying attention to things I usually ignored. I organized parts of my space that I had neglected for a long time. I revisited ideas I had once abandoned because they didn't feel exciting enough. I even spent time just sitting quietly, not trying to escape the moment, not trying to replace it with something else. And slowly, that quiet started to feel valuable. In the afternoon, I had another moment of temptation. This time, it came in a familiar form. I saw something online that I genuinely liked. Not something random, not something impulsive. It was useful, reasonable, something I could easily justify buying. For a few seconds, I considered it seriously. Not emotionally, but logically. And that was new. Before, I would have bought it quickly, without much thought. But now, I paused and asked myself a different question. Do I need this right now? The answer was simple. No. Not because it wasn't useful, but because it wasn't necessary in this moment. So I didn't buy it. And this time, it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like clarity. As the day moved into the evening, I realized that the challenge had already given me something more important than I expected. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about changing the way I respond to my own thoughts and feelings. I wasn't reacting as quickly anymore. I wasn't trying to fix every small discomfort instantly. I was allowing things to exist without immediately trying to change them. And that made everything feel a little more stable. By the end of the fifth day, I was still following the rule: no money spent. But more importantly, I wasn't counting the days as much anymore. The challenge was no longer something I was trying to complete. It had become something I was learning from. And as I looked ahead to the final days, I started to realize something quietly powerful. Maybe the real shock wasn't what happened when I stopped spending. Maybe it was what I discovered about myself when I finally did.